Okay. I'm just waiting to see if it's actually worked. Yeah, cool. I think we're good. Right. Can someone in the chat say if they can definitely hear us? Cool. All right. So, hello everyone. I'm joined by Fred here, and he is the co-creator of Astro. So we're just gonna do a bit of questions and then some coding and try and relate it all to Svelte to show you how cool Astro is because they've just hit 1.0. Do you want to introduce yourself, Fred?
Yeah,
Other than
first of
what I
all,
just said.
thank you so much for having me on. I'm super excited. Yeah, we just wrapped up a Astro community call, which Willow was actually a part of. So I feel like we've been chatting all day. It's been really fun to be a part of. Yeah, Astro is this really exciting new web framework for building fast, what we consider content-focused sites. So it's great for blogs, publishing, marketing sites, landing pages. It's a really cool new take on web frameworks that is pretty unlike anything that's come before it, including SvelteKit. But at the same time, Svelte is one of the kind of big use cases that we want to support. So you can use Svelte inside of Astro to build your UI. It's a super exciting kind of take on it all. So I'm excited to share more. But we just hit our V1
Cool.
last week. So obviously an exciting time for the project.
Yeah, I was super excited when I saw the V1. I already rewrote my website in Astro, and I had a really it's really fun to combine Svelte in meaningful ways. Like it really makes you think about where your interactivity needs to be and where it doesn't need to be, and just being able to see and know that I've only got the JavaScript I need is great.
Yeah, that's our big kind of focus is that you kind of opt into the interactivity. So you opt in by using Svelte when you need interactive UI, which is very different from something like SvelteKit, which it's kind of you're building in a Svelte application. Your whole site is an application. That's a really powerful model, but it ends up being overkill for some of the use cases that we care about. So that's why we like this as an alternative option. You can kind of choose between Astro and SvelteKit, and you're still using Svelte either way.
Yeah. So I guess pretty much has my first question answered about what is Astro. So we can jump into, I guess, probably the biggest question most people have is where, because obviously SvelteKit is the standard way of making Svelte apps. What type of websites would be better in Astro, and what type of websites would be better in SvelteKit?
Yeah, so it's an interesting. One of the things I love about this project is we're very explicit about when you should and shouldn't use Astro. Like, we'll be the first ones if you say like, I want to build the next Figma or like some really dynamic, stateful, lots of data flying around. If it feels like an application, we're very quick to say that's not really what Astro is designed for. You can do it, but you'll end up fighting Astro more than Astro will end up helping you. So if you imagine a spectrum between like getting content to the user as quickly as possible and like interacting with data, if those are two sides of a spectrum, we are much more on the first side of that, the kind of content where speed matters, if kind of simplicity matters, if you don't want to, I think one of the biggest problems that we see is like a hello world that to build your hello world, you have to like learn 10 different technologies and, and the site that you end up shipping has, tens and hundreds of kilobytes of JavaScript just to get a hello world. That's what Astro exists to solve. So if simplicity, speed, if those are things that matter to you, Astro is really designed for you and for that use case.
Okay. So when using Astro, what situations would you want to bring in Svelte? Because I know Astro seems to have its own component situation going on.
Yeah. What is Astro is one of the most interesting questions because it is this framework for what some people call a meta framework, right? We're giving you routing and server-side rendering, but we also have a component syntax. And really we think of it as almost like, hey, listen, if you don't want to use Svelte, React, or any of those frameworks, we're going to give you this way to write HTML. That's essentially, it's standard HTML with a little bit of extra kind of features. So you can put JavaScript variables in your template. You can map over an array so you can create like a list of items using something that feels a lot like HTML. That's essentially the Astro component syntax. So it's this built-in templating language that's very component-driven, but without all of the overhead of learning a React or a Vue or a Svelte, all of the features that they come with, which are great for the front end. Astro is much more, its component is for server-side rendering. There is no such thing as an Astro component running in your browser. It's purely a templating language for HTML. But then we get to basically say, hey, whenever you want to use Svelte, you can. So you can basically import into an Astro component, any component, a Svelte one being one of it. So literally like import, my to-do app or my to-do button from to-do app.svelte or to-do button.svelte. We'll let you bring that into our templating language. So you use it like any other component. But it's now actually we've created what we call an island in your HTML of an interactive component. You can also use that to build static HTML. So you can author in Svelte and the whole page is static HTML. But the way we like to think of it is that you're kind of creating these islands of interactive content where the majority of your site can be static, really fast, really lightweight. And then you lean into Svelte when you need that extra interactivity, that extra kind of dynamic, maybe it's a button or a form or something that is flying around the canvas for whatever reason. That's where you can still lean on your favorite framework like Svelte.
Yeah, I really enjoy that aspect of Astro because, especially because not everyone uses Svelte, unfortunately. But like for example, I have Solid.js friends, and they love Solid, and that Solid's great, obviously. So them being able to bring that in and still use Astro is I think it's really powerful.
Yeah, you see some frameworks talking about this where it's like, if you look at Next.js usage, it's huge. It's like one of the biggest web frameworks for this. But if you look at React usage, it's like 100. It's I don't actually have the numbers in front of me, but it's huge. There's so many people. I know because I work in the kind of JavaScripty I live in this kind of meta framework JavaScript app kind of world. But so many people are building with other technologies and just using React as a way to create interactive UI, and we're kind of combining those two things. Like we feel sometimes like a PHP or a Rails or something that's like helping you render HTML, and then the UI framework becomes this kind of sprinkled on extra layer. But we do it in a way where it doesn't feel like you have to go learn PHP, right? You're still using Svelte to author your UI or something that feels a lot like HTML.
Yeah. Going back to islands, for those who don't know, what is an island?
Yeah, so that's probably the magic sauce of what makes Astro special, is this idea of islands architecture.
Right.
And I think we've kind of, whenever you invent your own term, you kind of have to justify its use. So it's something that's very visual and we really like it. But another way to think of it is we're very much an MPA framework versus what you consider SvelteKit as an SPA framework. So if you watched Rich Harris's Transitional Apps talk, which is a great one from Jamstack Conf, I want to say. Yeah, you might remember. I don't actually remember when that was from, but that was a really very impactful talk for me. The idea there of building an SPA means a lot of things that are negative. Like it's a really heavy JavaScript app that you're sending down the wire. Like everything that Create React app introduced in the world, all those downsides of web development, where speed really suffered, complexity in some ways suffered, in some ways was better. There were these great pros, but a lot of really tough cons that came with it. And so Rich Harris gave this talk to an audience at some conference where talked about we should be trying to fix these problems, and SvelteKit was an attempt to make the SPA better. So you've still been building a JavaScript application, but we're going to make it faster, and we're going to solve everything, edge rendering, basically an admission that these are problems to be solved by a SvelteKit, using the same model, but trying to fix them and be faster by doing more. We see Astro as this chance to fix those problems by actually doing less and bringing in a different alternative architecture, which is actually very similar to the architecture that we used before we went down this kind of path of Create React app and Next.js and SvelteKit, where instead of trying to think of your website as a JavaScript application that might be running in the server, it might be running in the browser, and you have to kind of plan for both. Astro is very much, we call it server first, but it's this idea of everything you do in Astro is about server rendering HTML and then kind of improving it and enhancing it with interactive UI. But when you're building an Astro site, it's not going to run in the browser. It is very much a server rendered. And that's what we call MPA. The pages exist to be sent from the server to your browser, instead of a JavaScript application that's going to run in your client and do a bunch of things, but you got to download it first for you to tap into that. That's not our model.
Yeah, because I know SvelteKit, they traditionally SSR and then SPA from then on. But Astro is always static. So whenever you move pages, it's going and it's getting the HTML from whatever host you decide to use, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, and you're making me realize that server first is actually a confusing term, because you could call SvelteKit, it's the server first. It server renders first, but then it's sending
Yeah.
a lot of JavaScript to make that an interactive application, like really the whole UI. So imagine you used a header Svelte component to create the header of your site. That might not actually need any interactive UI, but you're still going to have to send down that component, and anything that was imported by it to render it now have to be sent to the user. Astro's take is, if it's static and you don't need any interactive UI, then we'll just won't ship that component. We're going to automatically strip it out from your output. So a header that is static is not going to have, it's zero JS, zero Svelte actually having to run in the client. Even if you authored it in Svelte, we're going to strip it out unless you tell us you need it for some reason.
Okay. Brittany asked, how does rendering work in Astro? Is it all static, or is there SSR and edge functionality?
Oh, that's a great question. We just launched for our V1 SSR as a production ready. So it was experimental for a couple months as we built out adapters to Netlify and Vercel and Cloudflare. But as of V1, it is officially production supported, kind of ready for you to build on top of. One feature that we don't have that a lot of other frameworks do is this idea of individual page level kind of, okay, your middleware is going to go on the edge, this page is going to run the server, and this page is going to be generated before your build. We're much more kind of right now, at least at this stage, all in one. So your whole site is static, or that's our default. You can opt into being server-side rendered, or you can opt into running your site on the edge. So we do give you that power using the deploy targets you already love. So Netlify being a sponsor of our project, we love supporting them and pushing them. But every other host, as long as they have an adapter in our ecosystem, which quite a few of them do, you can basically pick where you want your site to run. Build it statically and it's a static site, deploy a server and it's server-side rendered, or edge, if you are deploying to Cloudflare, you can deploy to the edge and have your entire site running close to your users. That's the way we currently treat our builds.
Okay.
Yeah, Brittany says in the chat, no hybrid routes. Exactly. You can't say some of each. You really are picking basically which of those buckets. We hope to have that soon, but for right now, with CDN caching and with good cache headers, you can get a lot of static-like performance from deploying to the server if you're willing to take on that complexity cost. So we see it as, a nice improvement, but you can build something very similar using full SSR today.
Okay. Cool. So my next question would be, because I would never thought of this in a million years, is what inspired you to allow people to bring their own framework to Astro?
Bad, I don't know, not knowing how much to bite off, because it's a big problem to solve, right? Support every framework. I'm sure it's one of those things, like smarter people probably would have avoided this.
When I first heard it, I was like, sorry, I can use React and Svelte in the same app.
In the same app, on the same page, you can nest one under them. Like we're really bleeding edge on some of this stuff. But what I like about it, and I think the reason we felt it was a bet worth taking, is that this isn't too dissimilar from how framework architecture has always been before the SPA. And like people ask, how is this even possible? How does React let you run next to Solid and next to Vue and next to Svelte? And the answer is because they all, or most of them, were originally designed for a world where single components were becoming React components. Like you'd ship a React component instead of a full app. So these are some of the oldest features of Svelte and of React and other frameworks that we're tying into. We are basically saying that you are rendering HTML and then those components become interactive. They run on the browser. So it's a lot to get working, but once it's all working, once we can kind of trust the stability, which is what this V1 release was really about for us, we're not tying in ourselves to kind of risky fundamental ideas, which is that frameworks are really good at coexisting and running on the page because they've been doing it for decades.
Yeah. I know a lot of people who use, because a lot of people use SvelteKit, they don't realize that in fact you can just mount any Svelte component to a DOM element, and that specifically is great for. I know I use it a lot for embedded things. Like for example, I'm doing with a client Shopify apps right now, and we can just mount a Svelte component, and it works great.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting how you kind of built that with Astro to just combine all these different frameworks together.
Yeah. Yeah, a really interesting thing that we did, which Svelte also does, but I think we for whatever reason it's a little bit more. I've never done this in a Svelte app, but we've done it actually a couple of times in Astro in our own sites, which is the script tag. Actually writing something into an inline script tag in your Astro component. We're going to let that run on the browser. So it's HTML first, right? A script tag's a thing. We're going to let that run. So even if you go to our new homepage, which we launched with V1, there's this hero card that kind of moves with your mouse and rotates. It's like this 3D rendered card that was built in an Astro component. The way it gets that interactivity actually isn't a UI component. It's a script tag using a web component that was written by hand inside of the Astro component. So not only does it let you kind of mix frameworks, but it also lets you, like, for some reason, it just feels like you're a little closer to the what you usually call the bare metal. Like you can write a script tag directly yourself, use query selector and query selector all, like all these APIs that other frameworks will try and hide from you. We're kind of realizing that they're still there, and the web platform's actually gotten really good in the last 10 years. Like web components and custom elements, it's an API that you can tap into with Astro much more directly if the use case makes sense. Again, if you love Svelte, keep using Svelte. This is maybe more advanced, but for the people who want it, for whatever reason, it's really fun to see that working well in Astro.
Yeah, that's really exciting. One of if we're talking about Svelte, one of the my favorite things is actions, because it gives you access to a DOM element. And so a lot of people, when they're searching for like a Svelte library, say, I don't know, like a popover, right? They'll search Svelte popover on npm and it doesn't exist necessarily. But there's like a million things written 12 years ago that still work perfectly. And you can it's one line of code to integrate that with Svelte. And so I'm assuming it'd be the same with Astro, which is just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a part of our story that we're still exploring. This idea of, okay, if I want a calendar component to add to my Astro site, I've built a marketing page for my dentist and I want to schedule an appointment. That calendar component, you can choose from any ecosystem. Just go find the best one. So even if you love Svelte, you can bring that calendar component in, put it in your Astro site, and it's a React component. You would never even notice. Like you can just pull it right from npm and it will run as a React component. That's a really cool feature because it taps you in. Like it gives you the whole world of npm, not just your little ecosystem to pull from. You don't need the Svelte flavor. You can just choose the best one. But the downside is obviously, well, if you do that too much, now you have a React component, a solid component, a Vue component, a Svelte component. Your whole page ends up having the kind of micro front ends problem, which is many different frameworks powering it. Each of them comes with their own weight. This is still a part of the story where it's like, well, what does that mean for our guidance? Should you do that or should you not? Right now, it's kind of up to you to keep an eye on that. If you've built your whole site with Preact, which is really fast, or with Svelte, which is really fast, React still is that really heavy framework. It comes with, I think, 30-something kilobytes. Like, there's a cost to bringing in your first React component that you'll never pay again, but that first one, you can try and avoid it.
If you use a React component, I'm assuming it will like still have that 30 kilobytes or whatever of React with it, regardless. If it's like loaded in the client, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if you use React in your own APIs and your own UI, great. But if you're a Svelte user, you've got this really light Svelte framework that you love using, and you bring in your first React component, it's like the cost of that one component comes with the baggage of the framework. Svelte is really good at this because the framework itself is so dang light, but not every framework is that lightweight.
Yeah, it's another great reason for Svelte being compiled is just like it's the bare minimum, and I know Solid does that too, which is great to see more people jumping on that. Kevin asked, is it possible to use page transitions within an application built with Astro?
Not currently. So that's actually a really good way to drill into the SPA versus MPA story, is the idea of navigation. And I think the biggest thing with the difference between like a SvelteKit and an Astro, it really comes down to how the routing works and how page transitions work. So in SvelteKit, again, you're shipping a JavaScript application to the user browser. So once they load that, they have this kind of full control. SvelteKit controls the whole page. So moving from page to page now becomes something that Svelte controls. It has the power to do that. It can, whatever features are built into SvelteKit, it can support. Astro, by using islands of interactivity, there is no Svelte owning the whole page. We're doing this kind of more traditional, the browser requests HTML from the server returns HTML, and individual islands become hydrated. So that means that when you go to a new page, there's nothing controlling. We've let the browser control things, and the browser loves asking for HTML from the server. So there's a lot of pros to this: complexity, speed. Obviously, we don't have to load a router for all this to work. You're using the things that the browser provides, like history API, going back to your location when you go back. Like there's these great things the browser provides when you don't build an SPA. But page transitions actually become very non-trivial. They become very difficult. Not impossible, but it's not something we've been able to tackle for V1.
Yeah. I just saw that there's apparently a page transition API into Chrome. So hopefully maybe we can use that instead, which will be even better than an SPA, I assume, because it's native.
So I would say that's our big bet in the other direction. How lazy can we be? Will Chrome actually give us this feature for free? That's our big bet on page transitions. I believe it is shipped in Chrome, but behind a flag. So if you want to use it right now, it's not even like available to everyone. You have to go and edit your browser, I believe is the way this works today. But it's a really cool API where us as Astro building your site, we can basically say, hey, all this static API that we know, all this static UI that we know exists on both pages, just keep it. Don't move it. Like going from page to page, just keep the header, keep the sidebar, and keep the footer, because we know that's going to exist on the next page. So don't even blow that out. Just leave it, and we'll smartly the browser will basically hydrate and kind of pull in the new HTML for you.
Yeah. There's so many questions now. David asked, can we use node modules at runtime? For example, if I want to import 3GS, or should we use Skypack/unpackage?
Oh yeah, nice Skypack shout out. Skypack is a project we worked on before Astro. It still exists today as a CDN script.
I found that out like a couple of days ago, and I was like, whoa, because Skypack's great.
Yeah, it's I will shout out some projects that have come along since, and I think do maybe a better job at it. Again, I don't say this. I'm trying to keep my ego in check, but JSPM is a really good one, and ESM.sh. Both are built on some newer technologies. So if you're trying to load JavaScript from a CDN, definitely check those out. Skypack, obviously near and dear to my heart, but those are some really great alternatives. Sorry, back to the original question. So I think what we got right, if I had to say like what I am kind of most proud, because this is what no one's been able to do yet, is the idea of merging together the new and the old. And so the new being NPM, that ecosystem, the old being the kind of like islands approach. We bring them together in a really nice developer experience. So we have the developer experience of a SvelteKit and the output of something more traditional, which has the speed benefits that we really care about. But from a developer experience, you can pull stuff from NPM, you can import it by package name. We're powered by Vite internally, so it's the exact same build engine that's powering SvelteKit. Behind the scenes, it's actually very similar in what we've pulled off from a developer experience perspective. We've just kind of exposed it in a different output. So a lot of the great kind of stuff that you love from working with Svelte and the NPM ecosystem with a different output is how I describe Astro.
Yeah, so you can still use like 3DS and stuff, because everything's like still processed by Vite and everything.
Yeah, exactly. So pull your NPM packages and Vite behind the scenes is going to prepare those for the web, bundle them at runtime, etc. You can also, again, we give you that script tag. So if you really want to, for whatever reason, you like to pull jQuery or 3GS from the CDN, you can also do that. Because our component language is so close to HTML, you have access to the script tag. You can do that if you prefer.
Okay. Brittany asked, is there a story for nested routing in Astro?
Not currently. We're really watching what the SvelteKit team is going through right now with the change of routing API.
They just released it yesterday.
Did it get merged and released?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I've had a brief look in it. It's less bad than I thought. My knee-jerk reaction was like, this is gonna be terrible. It looks really nice.
I mean, anytime you do anything that close to a release, like Rich is a smart guy. I'm sure there's a good reason to tackle it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you all do an episode on it, I would love to kind of see it, because I read through that discussion. I think he outlined the kind of, as a framework author myself, I know how much inconsistencies can kind of rub you the wrong way. And I think one of the things I saw him really trying to convey was this is going to be much more consistent. There's going to be one right way to do things, and therefore it's going to feel easier to use, cleaner, simpler. So we're watching, and I think Next.js is going through a similar transition. Remix has obviously always been on nested route. We kind of followed SvelteKit. I'll actually shout out like our original. So two things that we borrowed from SvelteKit in the early days. One, our SSR implementation. A lot of people don't know this. The Vite SSR implementation and the Astro SSR implementation, which used to be a part of Snowpack, were both written by Rich Harris originally. He wrote it for SvelteKit, and then with his permission, we brought it into Snowpack. I don't know if Vite took it verbatim or did their own take on it, but early days of all these frameworks can all be traced back to SvelteKit's internal SSR API that obviously Vite has taken and run with.
That's awesome.
The router is the other thing that we basically forked and attributed, obviously, from SvelteKit, just because clearly Rich thinks a lot about routing. So
Yeah.
we have not made the same transition. I think we're a little bit more hesitant to do something that big. But obviously there seems to be this shifting winds towards, or I guess deeper into file-based routing towards nested layouts. So we're definitely keeping an eye on it.
Yeah. There's a great video from Joy of Code showing before the changes were actually like implemented, showing what they were going to be. And so I'm watching to see if what people will start to release, because I know I've already seen so many tweets going over the changes. But yeah, it looks really good. And there's also a lot of stuff on progressive enhancement for forms that's coming off the back of this, which I'm really excited to see. So,
nice.
and I know
I hadn't heard about that.
Yeah, it's just in a discussion at the moment, and I saw there's also some. I think someone was working on that form stuff with Astro as well, which is quite nice.
Yeah, something about forms has gotten
Something
people
about
excited.
forms.
I think it's one of those things where if you look at the last decade, it was just so much like Webpack. There wasn't a lot of competition. I feel like Remix and Bun, I think, has done this with Deno. Like Remix, I think, really brought a lot of like competitive spirit in like what features are you building and what do you care about. I do see the connection, obviously, that like it's not an accident the Next.js is looking at nested layouts and SvelteKit is looking at forums and we're tweeting about forums. Like once someone shows something's possible, that's always kind of lights a fire under everyone else's. You know what?
Yeah. Sorry. Hold on.
Yeah, exactly. Forms like Remix, exactly.
Okay. So I asked in the Svelte Discord if anyone had any questions, and one of them was because currently Astro files do have JSX, right? Do you plan on doing any form of some like templating, like with the hashtag if thing that Svelte does, or things like solids, show and for and stuff, or do you plan on just putting all your money on JSX for like any sort of that sort of stuff in Astro?
You just reminded me. The other thing our original compiler was forked from Svelte's compiler. I promise this will be relevant. I'm answering the question. I promise.
It's okay.
Now, I didn't realize how much JSX like Svelte originally was. Like the idea, like we borrow a lot of syntax from Svelte. I actually would say we aren't JSX truly, because we are trying to be a kind of the same way TypeScript is on top of JavaScript. We see our component language as on top of HTML. So any valid HTML snippet is going to be a valid Astro component. That is not the same for JSX. So, for example, image tags don't need to be closed. In JSX, they do. It can make copy and pasting into something like React really hard because you end up having to change a lot of little things and you don't know where those errors are. It's kind of a mess. We actually aren't JSX. We are our own thing on top of HTML. That actually, I think that is a story. That's exactly how I imagine Svelte or Vue would answer that question. We are HTML with our own flavor on top of it. Having said that, we did not add our own primitives like hashtag each before. We figured that the JSX idea of anything can go in expression, including mapping over an array, it just seemed like let's do as little as possible for this V1. Let's give the bare minimum. And if we want to go that route, we can. So I think where we end there eventually 10 years from now, I don't know what that looks like. But right now, I'd say JSX is the lighter weight of the two, so we went with that. So if you want to map over an array, it's not a special Astro language. It's use an expression like you would inside of anything else in our component. But now you're going to iterate over an array and return some HTML. And yeah, it's going to feel a little bit more like JSX. But we aren't technically JSX.
Okay. Yeah, I know there's a lot of Svelte devs hear the word JSX and try and run. But it's really nice. I did it in Astro to do like just like a simple like taking an array and then mapping it to a component is just one line. It's nice.
Yeah. We're big fans of it. And I'd say one of the things we really care about is this, like we try to give everyone a hook in Astro. Like if you're looking at Astro for the first time, we wanted there to be this thing for you to grab onto no matter what you're coming from. So for React users, it's the component system syntax uses something like JSX inspirationally to do that sort of thing. And from Svelte or Vue the same way, it has the single file component. Like you can put your styles in a style block and it's going to be applied to the component. That sort of thing. Like every component we tried to grab every framework we tried to grab one thing from that would feel familiar in Astro. Not because we were trying to like market this thing, but more just like we actually genuinely are fans of all of these frameworks. It's weird to be building a UI framework in 2022 when all of these have been around for 10 years. You get to learn from what they did well and what you'd improve.
Okay. I'm out of questions, so unless anyone else has any, we can move on to maybe doing some code.
Yeah, I'm game.
Cool. Bear with me while I set this up. So we was going to take a look at, so Astro has a lot of templates, and so they've just released a blog one. So we was going to take a look at that and get it working.
Yeah, let's do it. It's if you're getting that set up, I can. So we just launched this, I think on Sunday or Monday. This new minimal blog template. So again, everyone wants to bring their own framework, so it's kind of, we try to kind of give you the minimal starting blocks. You'll see it when we open it up. It's pretty bare bones, but it lets us kind of show off some of the features of Astro, like working with RSS feeds and sitemaps. There's some really cool integrations for that. Scope styles, obviously, and because it's a blog, right? You have Markdown, you have MDX, you have your content that you get to work with. So there's some really cool stuff. Even in a minimal blog, there's a lot to show off about Astro that'll kind of help you grow that out if you're someone building a blog and wanting to start from there.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna share this, and then my StreamYard is I'm very new to this, so okay, everyone should be able to see that, I think. Can you see it, Fred?
Yep.
Awesome.
I make it a little bigger on my screen, but I can see it.
Cool. So if I've already installed, so I can just run pnpm dev here, and then we go. So
there it is. It's so anticlimactic, but there should be confetti when you open it up for the first time.
That should, yes. Although we when I was migrating my blog to Astro, I got I was going along and fixing all the accessibility concerns that Lighthouse had for me, and I finally got full 100s, and they gave me confetti and everything, which is really nice.
Our Discord, we're like collecting, like there's so many people on our Discord being like, oh my god, I had no idea there was confetti when you got 100. It's like, that's Astro in a nutshell. That that's our goal. Everyone should be getting 100s. That's our goal.
Yeah. Cool. So where do you want to start?
I guess floating around the page, maybe to see what has been built would be the right thing. So there's not much here, right? There's a homepage, there's a blog index, there's a couple of things here which are just kind of kitchen sink, throw it all in there. An about me section, and Twitter and GitHub will just both take you to the Astro Twitter, but the idea is that is something that you would replace with your own.
Yeah.
That's it. It's the bare bones, bare minimum. Here's what a personal site can look like, and here's where you can go from here. There's a couple of suggestions in here, but this is ultimately what you're getting with this. 100s across the board, MDX and in RSS feeds and sitemaps all integrated. And I'll shout out that this is based on the Bear blog open source template created by Max. Oh, I'm going to get his name. What's his name? By someone named Max, who is very cool and smart and built a great theme. So we're lucky to be able to use it here.
Yeah. So this is Markdown then, right?
The first page is Markdown, and that second page is MDX. If you haven't used MDX before, it's basically a way to write Markdown and also embed components in it. So it's like a Markdown plus syntax.
Yeah.
That's what we recommend for working with components in your Markdown.
In SvelteLand, we have MD specs.
Yes, exactly.
Which is really nice.
So here's the kind of wild thing about this for a Svelte user is we really push MDX for everyone, even Svelte users. So I'm sure someone could build a MD specs integration for Astro if they wanted to, but that's kind of the choice we made. Is MDX does work for everyone. Obviously, MD Specs has a lot of cool things, but for this use case, even if you're a Svelte user, we would recommend using MDX as your authoring format. You can still embed the Svelte components using MDX.
Yeah. Okay. We can just take a look at the code then, I guess. So we have these pages directory, which this naming conventions, I guess.
Oh, what font is this? I love this. This is so easy to read.
Oh, it's Comic Code.
I knew it looked familiar.
It's a Comic Sans fork.
Sans mono. Oh my god.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Sorry, my brain's adjusting to Comic Sans as a coding font. Yeah, so okay. What you have is the source pages directory is file-based routing. So SvelteKit, the old way, this will feel very similar. Next.js, etc. Everyone's playing around with this idea now. The idea is that inside of pages, it's the only kind of magic directory in our project. The file system is going to directly kind of turn into a routing system. So we read your file tree here and we create routes that tie to these pages. Index being your home page, blog.astro being /blog, about.md /about, that sort of thing.
What I found really interesting was that every single page has to be a full HTML document, which was like because obviously I'm definitely not used to that. It's been a long time since I've had every single page be a HTML document. But
it's fairly new, especially for the Svelte community, where really you're just creating your body and then you kind of inject your head a little bit more. Yeah, we go the other route.
Yeah. Is really great, and because I know there's this layouts folder, which isn't as I understand it, it's not like a built-in thing, but it's like what's the word, like convention?
Yeah. Source pages, source layouts, source components, these are things you'll see in most Astro projects, but there's nothing magic to them. It's just a place to put your components, and layouts essentially are just components that include stuff like the head and maybe your kind of header and footer from the site. It's nested components essentially. I'll talk a little bit about this. So for anyone who's seen this .astro syntax and like what is going on here, this idea of being built on top of HTML is exactly what we mean by that. So to your point, every Astro page, your job is to create the HTML element, the head, the body. You're building an HTML document essentially. We're rendering HTML is our job as a server with the components embedded. But obviously you can use components here. So you can see here base head, this is something that's copied across every one of these pages. I think even the blog post layout as well. It's essentially where you can put your common meta tags, your SEO tags, your links, and any global CSS. You can pass props, as you see with astro.props. That's where your props come from. So title, description, this is kind of creating the SEO metadata about your page, including a placeholder image.
Nice.
And then, then you can use components. So what I would recommend, so for anyone coming from Svelte, is think of the -- up to the top. It's your script tag. In the Svelte component, this is defining how the Astro component is going to run. Where it's different is that think of it as like literally we're going to run this code as we generate your site, and then we're going to template this output. So it's a little less all interconnected. There's no export for reactivity and making sure that updates and hooking. Like there's no user reactivity. We're just server-side rendering here. So it's truly simple, linear. Run this code, output this HTML. But if it helps anyone get a kind of hook into this, think of it like the script tag. This is where your imports go. You can define variables here, and then you can use them. You'll see site title and site description on line 11 are actually being used. They were imported, and now they're being used as a value here.
Yeah, and this is it correct that this everything between these little dashes here is only server side, run on the server?
Yeah. So whereas SvelteKit says, okay, make sure you're talking to an API in a specific way because this might end up on the client, and you need to make sure it can actually talk to your API and the client. By saying this is only server-side rendered, we basically say just think of it only as your server block. This is server logic that's going to run. So instead of trying to orchestrate an API, just like literally talk to your database in here. There's no risk of this ever ending up on a client. You can put database calls, you can put fetches to other APIs that you don't want your users to be hitting. Like this is your safe space. Fetch, await, all these great features are kind of safely kind of saved from ever bleeding onto the client by this front matter script.
Yeah, I've been really enjoying the top level 08. I haven't had a chance to use it because I migrated from CMS to Markdown, but just have the idea that because in Svelte components we can't have that yet, and hopefully someday we will. We have great. I know there's a lot of some people don't like the weight block we have in Svelte, but I think it's great. But having it top level is really nice.
Yeah, I mean it's the luck of having built this in 2022 is top level weight didn't exist when Svelte was first designed. So we've built this in a way where it's just going to run. It doesn't have to worry about the client. There's a lot that we get to benefit from that. So we're lucky to be kind of building this when we did.
Brittany asked, how does deployment work?
Oh, that's a great question. So I would definitely shout out our doc site. Has deploy guides for all of the big hosts. Again, Netlify, a fantastic partner, but we also have Vercel, Cloudflare, GitHub pages, deploying to AWS, just like a dumb S3 bucket, a smart server. Like there's guides and usually integrations for all of those.
And because Astro is static by default, you probably won't need an adapter unless you're doing SSL, right?
Yep, that's correct. So by default, we're going to always build you a static site. And our thinking is that you kind of reach for the server deployment when you need it. So usually that's when your site gets to a certain size. But for some people, it's also, I want this logic to fetch data live instead of when I build. So for whatever reason, that might be you reach for it when you need it. Static sites can basically deploy anywhere. That's kind of the main benefit of them. It's like every Vercel and Netlify, they all have really nice static site deploy stories where you don't need any logic adapter or anything. So I'd recommend if you're just trying to deploy the static site, you might not even need to read the docs if you're really familiar with how Netlify and Vercel work, but the guides exist to walk you through it step by step. They're really, really awesome for that. The adapter exists when you want to build a server that's going to run, because that kind of means something different for every one of these platforms. So the adapter exists to basically iron out any rough edges and give them all the same API surface, so that when you are building a site, your code doesn't have to change if you wanted to move from Netlify to Vercel. Instead, the adapter changes, and we handle all that complexity at the adapter layer. Again, I think that was, if not created by SvelteKit, it might have been created by it seems to be the new pattern that everyone's kind of fallen in love with. So Astro, again, being built when it was, we got to see that inspiration, and it's a system we're very happy with as well.
Yeah, I think the adapter thing that is really good. I know there's who did it? I think Unjs did Nitro, and that's you can even write like an API and then deploy it to all these different platforms.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's a really cool model and I think it's pushing. If it's not, my hope is that this is pushing, and I think I see it pushing all of these platforms to come together on some standard API, like request object, response object. These are web standard like interfaces that developers are starting to get behind. Obviously, it takes a lot longer for AWS to get behind it, but like any one of these platforms should be moving in that direction. I think there's a project called Winter CG that is being kicked off by Deno and Cloudflare to take these new platforms to push these web standards in a way that kind of forces Node.js, an older platform, to kind of come to the table.
Yeah. Kareem asked, are framework components larger since you do partial hydration for every component individually?
Good question. No, they shouldn't be. So is still bundling happening, and there's still code reuse. So if you imagine component A and component B, they both use component C. You are not ending up with any like extra duplicate code there. It's still the same bundling technique that a SvelteKit or a Next.js would be using. The way that we like to think about it is these different islands are hydrating the same amount of total UI. So if A and B both use C, you are still going to hydrate C twice anyway, because they both use it. The speed performance that we like to see is that we get to see these kind of islands almost loading and then hydrating in parallel. So obviously it's all running on the main thread. You're not literally hydrating them both in parallel, but what's really neat is that something like a header, which is usually pretty static, but or something even more important, like a buy button. Like if that buy button has to trigger something in your shopping cart on an e-commerce site, like that is an essential flow. That is like probably like that's why your e-commerce site exists, is to get someone to click that button. But let's say you also wanted a really cool, dynamic like image carousel lower down on the page. The way that Astro works is that those two things are going to load totally in parallel and totally in isolation. So the buy button island can come in and load. It's a button, it's not super heavy, and it'll come in and hydrate. maybe before that that carousel has even gotten 10% downloaded. So on a device like a phone or a lower speed connection, like that can come in really handy to basically let you prioritize how different things load on the page at a component by component by component basis. It also gives us control over when things hydrate. So imagine that image carousel. If it's halfway down the page, most people are never even going to get there. We can actually give that a directive that says only load this island if that becomes visible. So the second you see the carousel, it'll kick off and trigger the loading. But for whatever the percentages of people who don't scroll down that far, the rest of the site can load without even worrying about that until the user gets to it. So it's a really cool performance story. It ultimately ends up giving you less work to do by prioritizing different components in different ways.
So with that visible one, for example, will that load the JavaScript for that component when it's visible? When I say load, will it like fetch it? Or will it fetch it like, I don't know, when the browser's idle and then it's ready to go?
So that's, I'd say, the magic of Astro is that we let you basically choose the priority of anything on the page. So it's kind of up to you what your default is, because again, you're the one kind of choosing. So you can basically think of client load as the kind of default, like SvelteKit-like behavior, which is basically, as soon as I see this component, I want to kick off the loading of the code that's going to hydrate it. So the buy button and the carousel ASAP. Your lighthouse score won't even consider the page done until that gets loaded. It's that essential that it loads. There's client idle, which is basically saying wait for the browser to finish, consider the page done, and then now kind of behind the scenes go and hydrate this, basically as soon as resources are free. That's going to trigger after your page score, after your kind of page is considered done, the spinner stops spinning. So for performance, that can actually, even just that alone, like the buy button, you probably shouldn't do that because it does slow down the final total, but it does speed up the kind of overall page loading experience. And then the last one is client visible. Again, it's not even going to load, not even going to fetch the code. It's not even going to load the JavaScript. Not a single byte would be loaded until that became visible. We inject a little, it's called an intersection observer to kind of see when you've scrolled into the view. But that is inlined into the page. It's not a request that has to be made. So there's zero kind of JavaScript other than just the intersection observer.
Okay. Brittany asked, is there image optimization?
Oh my God, Brittany, great question. This is something that we actually just barely got in for V1, thanks to some awesome work by Tony Sullivan on the team. It is a image component similar to Next.js, similar to SvelteKit. Does SvelteKit have an image component?
Not built in, but there's loads of things on NPM.
Awesome. So probably similar to those as well. Basically, an image component that goes on the page. You can import your image, and it'll basically give you the height and the width automatically. It'll down convert it based on the size. It's really, really powerful. It includes in your final build, transforms it. There's just all these really cool features built into that. That's definitely one of the newer features. So still a couple limitations that we couldn't address before V1. The main one being that only works in a Node.js deploy environment. So if you're deploying to Deno, first of all, that's awesome. But second of all, the image component won't work because Deno is just such a different platform. We're doing work on that this week to unlock that. But for right now, it's Node only for the next week or so.
Okay, let's go back to the code.
Also,
I'm gonna have to remember to do that.
Tony would hate me if I didn't say it and love me if I did. There's also a picture element, which I don't think people use as often because Next.js, that image component is so kind of well known and well kind of copied. But we also shipped a picture element, picture component, which gives you the picture element, which if you aren't familiar, lets you almost kind of choose between different sizes, images, different formats. It's like a really super smart high-level wrapper around many different image components. That's super cool if you know what you're doing. I like my image component, but the picture's there if you want it as well.
It's interesting you say it's not used as much because I was reading on the docs the differences, and I was like, this picture one will do like 4 different formats for me that work on different devices. This sounds great.
It's really, really powerful. I have Tony's voice in the back of my head. He would say like more people should be using it. There's even a part of the new website where it had been a picture and I had trouble with it, so I turned it into an image, and then the next day he turned it back into a picture and fixed the problem that I've been having. So we got some fans of that element on the team for sure. The main difference is that it styles differently and I think lays out differently. So it's just something to be aware of. Again, if you know what you're doing, like Tony, you won't be able to hurt yourself. But if you're like me and a little bit less familiar, there are different rules to follow just because it's a different type of element.
Okay. So going back to the questions I'm assuming people are going to ask, when I start Astro, how do I add Svelte? Say I have this blog here and I want to start from here, and Svelte, is Svelte included by default, or do you have to do stuff?
Yeah, so great question. When you look at your Astro config file to see what the default was for this theme, also just to refresh my memory. So what we're giving you for free with this theme is MDX integrated. So you have the kind of tools to author Markdown with components embedded, and a sitemap. So it's a blog, sitemaps are important. We basically give you this automatic sitemap generation for free. Svelte is a third, it's a, not a third party, it's a first party, it's an official Astro integration, but it is something that needs to be added to make it run. We don't ship with it by default. What we do ship with is this great command called Astro add, which is basically going to walk you through it. So you can go into your terminal, and I'll walk you through kind of what that looks like.
Okay.
Your themes all ship with an Astro script, which basically lets you do npm run Astro, which you can kind of see now. In this directory, or if you use pnpm run Astro will do the same thing.
I've installed globally, that's why it worked with the just. Okay, so
just run so do npm run Astro, no add. We'll just kind of see that working, okay. Verify that it's working. Cool. So this is our basic CLI output. It's showing you build and dev. These are the ways that you interact with your Astro project. Add there is the one that we're going to use. So npm run Astro add. Cool. So this shows you all the different things. Yeah, there's a ton of different things that we support this way. It's probably one of the coolest features because I don't think anyone else is doing it exactly this way. Okay. But just there you can see the output for Svelte, and you can follow that.
With this Dino, would this mean I can develop in Dino or just deploy in Dino?
Just deploy in Dino. Okay, I always forget I'm supposed to be saying Dino. In Dino you deploy, but it's still Astro is a kind of not customizable runtime. Dino, I don't know if you saw that blog post. Dino shipping there or just announcing it.
Yeah.
Oh my God! So Dino with npm support is really interesting because the reason we can't do Dino today is because of Vite. Vite is a huge tool. It's got a bunch of dependencies kind of contained within it, and does not currently support Dino. If they can unlock that, that's going to be very, very interesting. Because Vite right now is the main reason we can't support Dino as the actual runtime. Okay. But Dino is actually way closer to what we want. Like we want TypeScript support for users who want it. TypeScript actually is on by default for our Astro components, so it's already kind of doing something very Dino-like. And then also it has a lot of these web standards that we have to polyfill in because Node doesn't have them. Dino does. There's a lot about it that actually is a much better fit for Astro than Node is today.
Okay, so if I just run Astro at Svelte.
So we're saying Astro will make the following changes to your config file. We're basically going to import and then add the Svelte integration to your config.
And then, even detects PNPM.
Yeah. There are a ton of PNPM users in the world, including us. So that was something we were excited to get right.
Nice. And then it's added.
It's more of like a next step. Like you're now free to use that. Like you're now safe to move about the cabin. You're now free to use Svelte. But I will say that to you instead. You are now free to use Svelte in your project.
Nice. So if I was to just test it out here, Reddit Hello World.
Yep.
And then just dump this into the index. Is it gonna? Okay. I'm not gonna get any.
You should. I don't know. Maybe it just kind of is taking a second to catch up and realize that you support Svelte now.
Okay, and then npm dev.
I think you might have two servers running now. Just a heads up. This seems to be on a new port than.
Oh yeah. Good catch.
No worries. Yeah, you do have to restart after you make a config change.
And then we got the Hello World. Amazing.
There it is. All right, so open up the dev tools in your browser. I promise you there is no JavaScript. It is totally statically rendered HTML for that Hello World component. So you can see, it's a dev server, so you will see some JavaScript on the page, but that's all dev server logic. There's no component from Svelte. There's no Svelte framework running anywhere on this page right now because you told us not to, basically.
Okay, so if I was to do something like I just added like a. We can just do it inline actually. This was not going to run out the box, right?
Let's try it, but yeah, the answer is no. Nothing nothing.
And so this is the case where we'd want to say, okay, maybe like client load, and this would be always available, and then we get the alert.
There it is. So that is both the kind of catch and the superpower of Astro. It's definitely one of the easiest things to miss when you're so many times, like I've had like a little counter demo. It's like, oh, it's not working. There's a bug in Astro. It's like, oh wait, no, I need to tell Astro that this is something that is important to be interactive. I'm sure in a future version we'll like auto detect it, but for right now, it's a really explicit way to write code, which is tell Astro what we hydrated, and then it'll hydrate it. But otherwise, the default is 0.js.
Yeah, and so that's wrapped it in this Astro Island.
Yeah.
I see. Is this a web component?
Yeah, we ship. So basically, Astro Island is something that we end up shipping the implementation with as a web component. So web components, there you go, a great use case for them. We end up basically owning the island. Svelte renders within it, and it kind of is this isolated little place where Svelte is now running and hydrating.
Nice. And so what would happen if this, for whatever reason, errored? Would that just isolate to this, or would it like affect the entire page?
That is a great question. I should know the answer to this. I don't. I believe it'll not affect the rest of the page. I don't think a JavaScript error kills everything. I think it does kill the script that's running, so that component would fail to do it.
Okay.
I'm sure some JavaScript experts in the chat will actually know the answer to this. That's my guess. But again, it's just so wild that it like forces you to be like, wait, right, we don't do anything special here. What does the browser do when JavaScript errors?
Yeah. Erika said, for some reason, TypeScript doesn't return auto imports when you're inside HTML or body. Not sure why. I haven't found a fix to that yet.
Gotcha.
So
Erica is our tooling expert who's built a lot of the kind of autocomplete and awesome master tools you're seeing here.
Yeah, I believe Prettier was like, as the formatter, was just shipped today, which I was very happy about.
Yeah.
As a PMPM user, setting up Prettier plugins is a pain. So having these little VS Code extensions do it for me is great.
Oh, agreed. Yeah, so that's now shipped inside of our, like if you do, I think it's Command Shift P format, like VS Code just knows to use Astro's Prettier integration.
Edit on save. So.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's all powered by Prettier behind the scenes. It's so cool.
So we're approaching an hour here, so we start to wrap up, and unless you have anything else you want to show, or anyone has any questions.
I'll let, if anyone has any questions, I feel like that's the better play. I'm just trying to see if any of these fun ideas. Yeah, it's mainly just we're trying to walk you through kind of getting comfortable. Yeah, this template's super minimal, so you can kind of add. Maybe the build command would just be cool to show off, just to kind of show the full complete story of working with Astro.
Okay, I can do that. So I'm just PMPM build, yeah.
So we're going to give you some nice output. It's a static output. You can kind of see the pages that we generate. So I actually I love how pretty this is, especially on a kind of smaller 10 to 20 page site. You can kind of see where they get output to. It's all right there. And then we actually ship this really nice. Again, I think this is something that SvelteKit does. We might have even borrowed from them, is the preview command. Oh no, Veet did this originally, but I think now everyone's copied it. Yeah, the preview command is awesome. So it's actually going to ship that directory that we just built. So if you go to the network tab now, you should see 0.js, really lightweight. Oh no, we hydrated it, of course. So we did hydrate the
component. I don't think much though. Like looking at this, it's like this is the type of amount I would probably expect.
Yeah. So again, we're doing really smart bundling here. So we realized, wait, you only have one Svelte component. We're just going to inline that all into the single test script. So if you had two components, there'd probably be 3 scripts here with one of the shared kind of Svelte framework. But Astro is smart enough to know one component. That means one bundle. We can be super, super optimized about that. If we want to go super deep on that, like there's this really cool story about code sharing as you move across the site, because we're not bundling at the page level. We're bundling at the component level, so we can go a little bit more granular, be a little bit more efficient with how we do it. But
yeah,
that's for time. If we ever want to draw some diagrams on the board, you can have me back. We'll go super deep into bundling because it's skin crawling.
I'm gonna butcher this pronunciation, but just Ian said do Svelte Stores work here?
That is an awesome question, because I think Svelte Stores was one of the first frameworks to support like state sharing. And actually, if you go to our docs site here, I'll just kind of throw it out because it's actually the better resource than I could even do. There should be a sharing state guide somewhere. Yeah, state. Yeah, there we go. We recommend something called NanoStores, which is not an Astro framework. It's a very popular NPM package. We recommend it because it has plugins for every framework. So this actually ended up being like the perfect use case for Astro, because if you wanted to share state with a Svelte component and a Preact component, you could. So I think in those docs, I think we might even call them boats. If this is island architecture, the boats are how you're going to send state. You can imagine a buy button needing to update the shopping cart number. You would do that through a store. But I think we literally have Svelte. Actually, if you even scroll up before you get to this part, there's a call out FAQ. How do Svelte scores compare to NanoStores? They're very similar. I think they share a very similar API. If you want to avoid a third-party library, Svelte stores are a great. Oh God, I can't talk. They're great. They work fine. They're fantastic. You can use them without reaching for NanoStores if all you're using is Svelte.
Yeah, but if you wanted to share state between components, NanoStores would be better.
Yeah, or if you're a Preact or a React user, they don't have the same awesome.
But yeah, between other frameworks, yeah. Cool.
I think we built one of our. We never released this, but there's an e-commerce shop that we want to eventually get out for Astro, so you can buy shirts and hats and stuff. We used Svelte to build that and never had to reach for NanoStores. We just used Svelte Stores.
Nice. Awesome. Does anyone else have any more questions?
Cool. One more page of docs that I'll just shout out because it's very, very beautiful. If you go back to the docs site, deploy is one of the guides we have. So to kind of tell the full story, yep, you can see them all here. Even click on deploy in the sidebar so you get back to kind of like the one level up. Re-click the link. Literally so many different providers. If you work at a company that isn't featured here, please, please, please help us write a guide. We want this to basically be everyone. So we showed dev, we showed build, we showed preview, and then the final thing you do is follow one of these guides to help deploy and get it into production.
Awesome. It's nice to see so many familiar faces here. I'm an avid Cloudflare user and Netlify user, so. Okay, well, if no one else has any questions, I can't find any anywhere. Thank you so much for coming on, Fred. It's a great stream. It's really great to show off Astro, especially because it's just released 1.0. I've been following it for probably a year. I think it's been for like just over a year. It's been going on, and it's been really fun to watch it grow and actually now finally build something with it. And getting to use Svelte is great.
Yeah. Oh, that means a lot. It's taken a lot to get here. I mean, anyone who used it a year ago knows it was a very early alpha piece of software. So a year later to be standing here with a v1.0 production ready. Yeah, we're big fans of Svelte. So having that Svelte support story ironed out was huge for us. So really excited to see it working here as well.
Now we just got to wait for the SvelteKit 1.0. Fred's internet died right at the end.
Oh no, you lost me. I
think you're back now.
I think that was me, right?
Yeah.
The router shut off, back on again. I think I had just pitched Fighting Rich Harris, and
I think if Fred's internet is never coming back, ending on Fighting Rich Harris is very comedic.
I'm not going to say anything else. I think I'm going to get kicked off the Wi-Fi.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for watching. It was a great stream, and
Thank you for
hopefully
having me on.
we'll be back here at some point with more Astro content. Cool. Bye.